The year is 1941. Across the oceans, a world already burning drags the United States into a war that promises to test every factory, every farm, and every family. Pearl Harbor smolders, ships lie broken in the harbor, and overnight an entire nation turns from peace to total mobilization. Men will be needed by the millions. They will travel to deserts, jungles, and frozen islands, but before they can fight, they must live. The army can feed them, the navy can move them, but where will they sleep? The answer seems simple until the first monsoon tears through a Pacific encampment. Canvas tents buckle, ropes snap, mud swallows everything. In 3 weeks of tropical rain, a battalion's living quarters rot to shreds. Commanders begin to send urgent cables back home. They do not ask for weapons, they ask for roofs. The Bureau of Yards and Docks in Washington receives the call. Its engineers know what the front needs: a structure light enough to ship by sea, quick enough for untrained hands to build, and strong enough to withstand wind, rain, and shellburst. It must rise in a day and last for years. There is nothing like it in the world. So the Navy turns to the George A. Fuller Company of New York, a name already trusted to raise skyscrapers and bridges. Fuller's engineers gather at a small naval station on the Rhode Island coast, Quonset Point. Their workshop smells of salt air, steel, and welding smoke. Here, in January 1942, America's most practical miracle begins to take shape. The designers study the old British Nissan hut, a relic of the previous war, a half-cylinder of corrugated iron. The concept is sound but outdated. They widen it for American beds, strengthen its ribs, and make every piece identical so that any part can replace another. The new hut will be 20 feet wide, 48 feet long, and stand 10 feet at the center of its graceful curve. Its secret lies not in thickness but in geometry. The arch itself carries the load. When the first prototype stands on the runway at Quonset Point, the engineers step back in silence. A simple steel shell bolted to a wooden frame curves against the winter sky. It looks more like a piece of machinery than a building. They test it with hurricane fans, with rain nozzles, even with simulated blasts. The structure sways, moans, but holds. Where flat walls would tear away, the curve merely bends and returns to shape. Word spreads quickly through the Navy's channels. The design is approved in record time. Its name comes from its birthplace, the Quonset hut. Factories across the nation are ordered to retool. Steel mills in Pittsburgh, sheet metal presses in Illinois, lumber yards in Oregon all take part. In weeks, the hut's components become as standardized as bullets. Each complete building can be packed into a wooden crate 8 feet long. One crate contains the ribs, another the panels, another the floor and doors. 6 crates make one hut. They fit perfectly in a truck or in the hold of a Liberty ship. In the first months of production, only a few hundred huts roll off the lines. By mid-1942, thousands per month leave the factories. The assembly manual fits on a single sheet of paper. 6 men can raise the frame before lunch and fasten the final panels before sundown. No carpenter's apprenticeship required, only a wrench, a hammer, and the will to finish. At dockyards, soldiers and sailors practice the new skill. Rows of arches rise like waves along the coast. Some serve as classrooms, some as storehouses, others as barracks awaiting shipment overseas. Every completed hut is a promise. Somewhere across the ocean, men will have shelter. As American forces push into the Pacific, the first huts follow. On tiny coral atolls, the Seabees, the Navy's construction battalions, land behind the Marines. They bring bulldozers, cranes, and boxes marked Quonset. In the humid air, they work with practiced rhythm, bolting, lifting, tightening. Within a day, silver arcs gleam in the sun where jungle once stood. The Quonset hut proves its worth instantly. Rains slide harmlessly down its sides. Winds howl and pass. Inside, the air stays dry enough for men to sleep, for radios to function, for medical stores to remain usable. Officers who once doubted now request them by the dozens. Entire bases spring up like reflections of an American town. Huts for command posts, huts for mess halls, huts for surgeries and chapels. Back home, the production frenzy grows. Women on factory floors rivet panels side by side. Children collect scrap to feed the furnaces. The Quonset hut becomes part of the home front vocabulary. Newspapers show pictures of them lined up in perfect rows, captioned "Portable Homes for Victory." Engineers continue to refine the design. Ventilation hoods are added for tropical heat, insulation for Arctic cold. The standard model is joined by larger versions, the double width and the warehouse type, stretching to 100 feet in length. Yet the principle never changes: light steel ribs, corrugated sheathing, and a curved silhouette that defies destruction. The speed of production astonishes even its creators. At the program's height, A Quonset hut leaves an American factory every 10 minutes. Trainloads move to coastal ports, where they disappear into the bellies of ships bound for every theater of war. Meanwhile, at Quonset Point, a small testing field continues its experiments. Engineers load huts with sandbags until floors sag. They measure snow weight, tropical mold, and the corrosive salt of ocean spray. Reports return to Washington stamped satisfactory, continue production. By early 1943, the Quonset hut has become as familiar to servicemen as the Jeep or the sea rations tin. It follows them from one end of the globe to the other. Some joke that they could march blindfolded through the Pacific and still find their way by the sound of rain on corrugated steel. What the men rarely know is the mathematics behind their shelter. Each curved rib distributes weight evenly along its arc, reducing stress to a fraction of what a flat wall would bear. The semicircular profile offers minimal resistance to wind. The hut is not just strong, it is efficient, every pound of material used to its full advantage. In an age of rationed steel, that economy matters as much as armor plate. At bases from Guadalcanal to Espiritu Santo, rows of huts mark the growing American presence. They become field hospitals where surgeons operate through the night, their instruments glinting under single bulbs. They serve as aircraft maintenance sheds where mechanics strip engines slick with oil and sweat. They house radio operators hunched over dials, sending coded messages across the Pacific dusk. And always the Seabees build more. Their reputation grows alongside the huts themselves. We build, we fight, they say, and nowhere is that motto truer. When shells fall, they dig. When the shelling stops, they raise steel arches. Many huts stand within hours of landing on enemy shores. They are the first permanent mark of American occupation, the architecture of advance. In the North Atlantic, huts appear on icy coasts where supply ships unload cargo under polar winds. Engineers modify the design again, thicker floors, felt lining, double doors. Even in temperatures far below freezing, stoves glow inside and men sleep warm. In North Africa, sun-baked crews line the roofs with sandbags to keep interiors cool. The structure accepts every adaptation without complaint. By 1944, more than 80,000 huts circle the globe. Each carries the stamp of its origin, Quonset Point, RI, a quiet reminder of the small New England station that changed the way the world builds. Inside the huts, life develops its own rhythm. Morning begins with the metallic echo of boots on the floorboards, coffee heating on a field stove, the creak of a door. Even far from home, the shape of the hut gives a strange comfort, familiar, predictable, human. Soldiers decorate the walls with pin-ups, calendars, and maps. Some give their huts nicknames painted over the doorway: the Ritz, the Snake Pit, Eagle's Nest. At night, the sound of rain on the steel roof becomes music, steady and relentless. Men fall asleep counting the drops, knowing that whatever storms rage outside, the curved shell above them will hold. The Quonset hut has become more than a structure. It is a symbol of the industrial genius that underwrites the Allied war effort. The same factories that build bombers and tanks also build homes for the men who use them. Every rivet, every bolt, every crate shipped overseas is part of that vast rhythm of production that defines America in war. As campaigns stretch across new islands and continents, the huts adapt once again. Some are fitted with blackout shades for air raid protection. Others receive concrete foundations for longevity. A few experimental models use aluminium to reduce weight for air transport. The engineers at Quonset Point record each trial with precision, filing blueprints that will influence architecture long after the guns fall silent. From Washington, the Navy sends reports to Congress noting that the Quonset program has saved millions in time and material. But beyond the numbers lies a quiet human success: the lives preserved by shelter, the morale lifted by a dry bed, the sense of order in a chaotic world. As the war moves toward its decisive years, the humble hut will accompany the troops into every new campaign: Europe, the Philippines, the Marianas, and beyond. Wherever the United States plants its flag, these curved silhouettes will stand behind it, practical monuments to engineering under pressure. By the summer of 1944, the Quonset hut had become as common on the front lines as the American flag itself. In the islands of the Pacific, the silver arcs gleamed between palm trees and bomb craters, reflecting sunlight like scattered mirrors. On airfields stretching across the newly captured Marianas, entire cities of corrugated steel rose seemingly overnight. Each hut represented speed, efficiency, and survival. In England, as the Allies prepared for the invasion of Europe, the huts lined airbases from Cornwall to Scotland. Pilots of the 8th Air Force slept beneath their curved roofs before missions over occupied France. Inside those huts, the air was heavy with the smell of oil, leather, and fear. Letters home lay folded on bunk beds beside flight jackets. Outside, the rhythmic sound of rain on steel blended with the distant throb of engines warming for dawn takeoff. Everywhere the hut went, it adapted to the climate and the culture. In the tropics, soldiers stripped off their shirts and installed fans. In the Arctic, engineers wrapped the structure in felt insulation and lined the floorboards with plywood. The Quonset was never elegant, never luxurious, but always dependable. It became part of the landscape of war, a curved, unpretentious symbol of endurance. In Italy, they served as hospitals near the front lines. Nurses walked the curved corridors under dim lights, their footsteps echoing softly on wooden floors as they checked bandages and whispered encouragement. The huts provided clean air and dry warmth, often the difference between life and death. In France, engineers converted them into radio rooms and map centers. Intelligence officers gathered around long tables inside, tracing battlefronts with trembling fingers as the war inched toward Germany. For the Seabees and Army engineers, building became an act of defiance against destruction. Each hut erected meant another foothold, another base of operations from which to push forward. They built under fire, under monsoon rain, even at night under blackout conditions. The curved ribs of the huts rose in the darkness like the bones of a new civilization being assembled from chaos. As the Allied armies advanced, the Quonset hut came to mark the progress of liberation. In newly captured French ports, they appeared almost instantly, storage for rations, ammunition, and fuel. In Belgium and Holland, they housed displaced civilians. Children peeked curiously at the strange round buildings that had arrived with the American trucks. Some would live in those huts for years, long after the shooting stopped. And then came Germany. As the war in Europe neared its end, thousands of Quonset huts dotted the conquered territory. They became administrative offices for occupation forces, repair depots for vehicles, dormitories for soldiers awaiting orders home. On the airfields that had once launched Luftwaffe bombers, American planes now rested beside long rows of steel half-moons. The image was unmistakable, the architecture of victory. When Japan surrendered in 1945, the numbers were staggering. More than 170,000 Quonset huts had been produced, enough to build a city larger than Philadelphia. They stood on every continent except Antarctica. From Panama to Iceland, from Okinawa to Normandy, the curved shape had become an international sight, the global fingerprint of American logistics. The war was over, but the story of the Quonset hut was not. In peacetime, the military found itself with an abundance of leftover structures. Ships returned home stacked with disassembled huts in their holds. Warehouses across the United States filled with crates marked property of the U.S. Navy. The question arose, what to do with them now? The answer came swiftly. Universities, struggling to house thousands of returning veterans under the GI Bill, turned to the huts as emergency dormitories. Across campuses from California to Maine, students studied and slept in recycled war shelters. They nicknamed them tin cans and victory huts, and though they leaked in the rain and creaked in the wind, they offered an affordable start to post-war life. Families, too, found shelter beneath the curved roofs. With housing shortages across America, surplus Quonset huts were sold for as little as a few $100s. Veterans bought them, erected them on small plots, and began new lives. Children played in yards beside the same kind of buildings that had sheltered their fathers overseas. The hum of peacetime replaced the roar of war, but the architecture remained. Industrial companies adapted the design for workshops and warehouses. Farmers used them for grain storage and tractor sheds. Even churches and community centers sprang up inside the humble shells. The simplicity of the Quonset design, its modular, bolt-together construction, made it a natural choice for a country eager to rebuild. By the late 1940s, the silhouette that once defined military bases had become part of the American domestic landscape. Meanwhile, overseas, thousands of huts remained standing on the sites of wartime bases. In the Pacific, many were converted into schools, hospitals, and government offices by local populations. Some still stand today, their metal skins rusted but intact, witnesses to a global conflict that reshaped the world. Architects began to study them as symbols of efficiency. The curve, they realized, was not merely a wartime necessity, but a blueprint for resilience. The hut's combination of lightness and strength influenced post-war architecture, from airplane hangars to modern prefabricated housing. What began as a temporary solution became a permanent idea. The very name Quonset entered everyday language, detached from its military origins. It came to mean any semicircular steel building, whether on a farm or an industrial site. The word itself carried echoes of the war's greatest engineering lesson, that good design must serve speed, simplicity, and purpose. Back in Rhode Island, Quonset Point transformed once again. The wartime factory was repurposed for peacetime industry. Workers who had once built shelters for battle now built equipment for reconstruction. Yet the memory of those frantic years lingered in every beam and bolt of the old hangars. The place that had given its name to an invention watched its creation spread across the world. Through the 50s and 60s, surplus huts continued to appear in unlikely places: Arctic research stations, mining camps in Alaska, missionary outposts in Africa. Each time a team faced isolation, harsh weather, or limited resources, the Quonset proved its worth. It could be shipped flat, assembled in a day, and endure almost anything. Decades after the war, the same principles still saved lives and money. In the cultural memory of the soldiers who had lived in them, the huts occupied a strange affection. They were cramped and noisy, but also safe. They symbolized moments of rest between battles, laughter among comrades, the sound of rain when the world outside burned. Veterans reminisced about them in memoirs and reunions, describing the huts as our steel cocoons, our home away from home, the best roof we ever had. Filmmakers and photographers captured them endlessly. In black and white war footage, the curved shapes appear in the background of airfields, supply depots, and encampments. Their presence became visual shorthand for the American war machine: efficient, mobile, unstoppable. Even decades later, whenever a Quonset hut appears in a film or documentary, it carries the echo of that era. As time passed, historians began to recognize the Quonset hut as a quiet revolution in architecture. It had no ornament, no style, no luxury, yet it represented a leap in industrial thinking. The prefabrication, the modular design, the minimal waste, all anticipated the construction methods of the future. What had been designed in haste for war became a model of modernity. By the 21st century, surviving Quonset huts had taken on a new life as historical relics and design curiosities. Artists transformed them into studios. Small businesses turned them into cafes or workshops. Architects revived their curved geometry in eco-homes and disaster shelters. The legacy of the wartime engineers who worked at Quonset Point now lived on not only in military history, but in civilian imagination. Yet at the heart of the story remains the same truth that sparked it all in 1941: necessity drove innovation. The Quonset hut was not born of ambition or beauty, but of need. The need to protect soldiers far from home, to create order in chaos, to build faster than destruction could tear down. In its simple arch of steel, humanity found a practical expression of survival. When one looks at the few huts still standing today, their panels streaked with rust, their doors creaking in the wind, it's hard not to feel a certain respect. They are survivors, just like the men who once slept inside them. They endured storms, bullets, and time itself. They remind us that sometimes the most extraordinary achievements come from the humblest beginnings. Every rivet, every curve, every crate that left an American port in wartime carried with it more than materials. It carried a belief that even in destruction, construction could triumph, that every shelter raised meant one more day of endurance, one more chance at victory. The Quonset hut stands as one of the great silent heroes of the Second World War. It had no engines, no guns, no glory, yet without it, the machinery of war might have stalled. It provided the shelter for planning, for healing, for resting, and for living. It was the roof under which victory was prepared. And so, from the jungles of the Pacific to the snowfields of Europe, from the dust of Africa to the plains of America, the story of the Quonset hut remains a reminder of human ingenuity in the face of crisis. Its curved shadow stretches across decades, whispering of the time when the world built not just to destroy, but to endure. Today, as engineers and architects once again search for ways to build quickly and sustainably, they find themselves returning in spirit to Quonset Point, to that small workshop where a handful of men, armed only with blueprints, courage, and urgency, created something timeless. A shelter that was more than steel, a shape that defined an era, a home forged in war but destined for peace.